Good morning, everybody. It is absolutely great to see everybody again and getting ready for 2012. And I would like to introduce to you my husband. Where do we start? They always have the story about the guy that came along, the girl that came along and saved the guy. And Nick, in my story, Nick is kind of the guy that saved the girl, you know, when I met him. Most wonderful man in the world, utmost integrity. He's a statesman. I think most of you have known him in the last few years, and boy, I could go on and on, so I'm not going to. Without further delay, Nick Popaditch.
Hey, thank you for having me back. And I'm going to take a few minutes and talk about just the things that got me into politics to begin with. And what brought me into the room with you originally, and what brings me back to speak to you today. Talk a little bit about the state of the nation and what I think myself and all of you can do to help. I was a career Marine. That's what I did coming out of high school. I served under Presidents Reagan, Bush 41, Clinton, Bush 43. And I wasn't politically active. I just, I voted, you know, and they just always told us, you know, if you didn't know what to vote for, vote Republican because they give us pay raises. But I really didn't know. And I wasn't very involved in the process. And I served in combat, and the first time I went to combat was back in Desert Storm, and it wasn't a very politically charged type of event. Everybody was motivated, everybody was behind the troops, and it was military fighting the military. And so it wasn't the sort of thing that anybody really got involved with politically. One of the first things I learned in the Marine Corps was Semper Fi. Always faithful. Faithful to God, country, and Corps. And when I came out of high school, I thought, that's a pretty, yeah, I like that. And I thought, that's a pretty good thing to guide your life by. That's a pretty good philosophy to follow. And, you know, and they made it easy. We had these great heroes from our nation. Gunny Basilone, Chesty Puller, surrounded by 200,000 Chinese communists said, fellas, we got them right where we want them. We can shoot any direction, hit the enemy. These are guys, and this is a good thing to get involved with. So I thought, okay, I can follow this, I can do this. And then when I got out to the Fleet Marine Force, one of the first non-commissioned officers I worked for, he taught me what it was really all about. He said, Pop, he says, Semper Fi is easy in the middle of a sunshiny day. Anybody can sit out here when the sun's shining and say Semper Fi and say you're faithful to God, country, and Corps. Anybody can do that. That's easy. He said the real Marine, that real deal guy, is that one when it's 0400, 4 in the morning for you civilian types, 4 in the morning. When you're cold, you're tired, you're wet, you're wounded, you're up against adversity, you're hungry, you're up against the wall. The guy who believes in it then, the guy who follows it then, that's the real deal guy. That's who you want to be. And I thought, okay, that makes a lot of sense. So I spent my time looking for those 0400 moments, always trying to be up for them, and I always thought they would always be in a military capacity. I always thought they were going to be at that 0400 time when I was wounded or whatever. And it turns out I would find out in my life that those 0400 moments don't come when you're looking for them. They never come where you think they're going to be. I became a gunnery sergeant, I became a leader, so I would take this philosophy and try and pass it on to my Marines. I served in the March up to Baghdad. Now this was starting to get into our era of modern time now. And now the war and these sorts of things were starting to take on a little bit more of a political nature. And I didn't really realize it's so much on the ground. But that's kind of what I'm going to talk to you about today. How it looked on the ground and how it was perceived in our political process. And how that helped shape who I would later become when I got involved in the political process. When we crossed the border into Iraq, the big unknown was the Iraqi civilians. What were they going to do? Were they going to embrace us as liberators? Were they going to take a shot at us around every corner? Were they going to fight to the death for Saddam? Nobody knew. So I served under the greatest general, I think, in our military. His name was General Mattis. And General Mattis gave us his simple philosophy. He said, Marines, be no better friend and no worse enemy. That was General Mattis' foreign policy. And I think Barack Obama could take a page out of this one. Be no better friend. Yeah, absolutely. No better friend, no worse enemy. He said, share your courage with the world. Show these Iraqis what being an American is all about. And you'll see that they'll want to get on board with that. So I knew as a tank commander, because tanks lead in just about everything. Joe will testify to that. Tanks lead. And so I knew I would probably be the first American many of these people would ever see. So I try to represent my country well. And I generally enjoyed this. I enjoyed being an ambassador for our nation. I enjoyed meeting Iraqi people and talking to them and finding out we had so much more in common than anybody would have ever guessed. Because a lot of times when it's reported back here, a lot of people focus on the differences, and we are very similar in many, many ways. We got to Baghdad, and a strange thing happened. These Iraqi civilians that we'd been interacting with the whole way up there, when we got there, they just disappeared. They hid. They hunkered down. Because now there were Americans in their capital city, and they knew their life was getting ready to change very drastically, and they didn't know how. So they did what logical people would do, and they hid. They hunkered down. They just waited to see what was going to happen. And we did what Marines do. We just kept taking ground, taking ground. And we got to downtown Baghdad. We got to a place called Firdos Square, which is great Iraqi logic, because Firdos Square is actually a circle, but the Iraqis call it Firdos Square. Now, in the middle of Firdos Square was a large image of Saddam Hussein, a big, grand statue, 40 feet tall. And yeah, many of you may have seen this image on TV, or through the news, or on the newspaper, or whatever. Now, for us, these images of Saddam were funny, because we don't think that way as Americans. Everywhere you went in Iraq at that time, in 2003, everywhere you went, every room you went into in Iraq had a picture of Saddam. Every street had a mural to him. Every corner, every town square had a statue to him. And what they were warnings. They were warnings to the people about this government, this dictatorship, this Iraqi government, that you don't stand out. You don't speak out. You just shut up and take what we give you. Because if you speak out, secret police come find you. And so to them, these images were very powerful. To us, they were just funny. As Marines, we made up nicknames for him. Like, remember the white suit Saddam Hussein? We used to call that Fantasy Island Saddam. We had nicknames for all these things. Because to us, it was just funny. But to the people, there was nothing funny about it. So to us, this meant nothing. We just encircled it with our tanks and waited for the next order. To the people, they looked at this image, and it was very powerful. They saw this image of this dictator that they'd had to fear, and now was surrounded by Americans. And they thought, you know what? Maybe we don't have to be afraid of this guy anymore. And as with all great things, it started with one individual. One man came out to our perimeter, and he was met with the handshake of an ally. Not a rifle barrel, not a rifle butt, but with a handshake. And the others saw this, and they were inspired. And they started coming out, first twos, fours, dozens, and then hundreds, then thousands. We had an Iraqi block party going on down there in downtown Baghdad. People were celebrating, they were rejoicing. And I was just looking at this, and I wasn't really getting it at the time. And then they turned their attention to that statue of Saddam, and they started trying to knock it down. And I was looking at this, and I'm thinking, geez, they're trying to beat it down with a sledgehammer. And it's as big as this room. So it's going to take them a week to beat that thing down. Hope we get to see it. Well, then a kid walks up to one of our vehicles and says, Mister, can you help us tear down the statue? And the vehicle he walked up to was what we call an M88 tank retriever. It's like a tow truck for the tanks. It's also got a 90-ton winch on it for pulling tank engines. Also ideally suited for tearing down statues. Now, many of you may have seen this image in the news. I want to tell you I'll tell you a couple of things that you may not have heard. The Marine that went up there, remember there was a Marine who went up there and put a chain around Saddam's neck, and he was the guy who actually pulled him down. His name was Corporal Eddie Chin. Eddie Chin was the son of a Burmese immigrant. Eddie Chin's father brought his family here to America in search of liberty for his family, in search of a better life for his children. And I always thought it was very ironic that Eddie Chin would become a symbol of liberty around the world, this son of the Burmese immigrant. And Eddie Chin also was from New York City, which I always thought was a nice little turnaround for 9/11. Now, there was a flag that went over Saddam's head, and I want to tell you about the flag, because that flag has a very special story behind it. My platoon commander was a fellow named Lieutenant McLaughlin, Lieutenant Mack. Nothing particularly special about him, Lieutenant, one each out of New Hampshire. Joined the Marine Corps, became an officer, was assigned as a tank officer, went to tank training, got hurt in tank training. Nothing life-threatening, no big deal, but broke his leg. We can't send a broken second lieutenant out to the fleet because it's a bad leadership model. We don't make fun of him, so we can't do that. So they got to find something for him to do. So they send him to work at the Pentagon. But he's a second lieutenant, he doesn't know anything. He's not going to be writing the war plan. So he's relegated to just fetching coffee for the generals and rehabilitating this leg. So that's what Lieutenant Mack does. He's out doing his daily duty, but he's also rehabilitating this leg. And he gets where he can finally start running PT on this leg. And he goes out running. That day he goes out running was September 11, 2001. Plane comes in, strikes the Pentagon. Young Lieutenant Mack runs back, does what all the Americans there did, and assisted in the rescue and relief of his fellow Americans. And on September 12th, he did what all Americans serving did, continued to train for this war that was getting ready to happen. Lieutenant Mack got better, he got up to full duty, and got his orders to 1st Tank Battalion, 1st Marine Division. Now, Lieutenant Mack, he didn't write the war plan, but he worked for the guys who did. And they looked at Lieutenant Mack's orders, going to 1st Tank Battalion, 1st Marine Division, knew he was going to be the tip of the spear. They folded up the American flag from that Marine detachment. They handed it down to young Lieutenant Mack. And they said, you get to Baghdad, you find a good place to put that. And that's the one that went over Saddam's head. And I tell you, the people celebrated. When that flag went over his head, because I've heard this story rewritten by those in the media, by those who write textbooks and all kinds of other crap. I've heard it rewritten, and I've heard this referred to as an international faux pas. I'll tell you what the people on the street there saw with that American flag. They saw that flag represented liberty. It represented freedom. It represented a better way of life, and they celebrated. They absolutely did. So down comes a statue. And they started celebrating. They were rejoicing. And I looked at it, and that's when it finally hit me, what I was seeing. I was seeing freedom, liberty. People who'd never known a day's liberty their entire lives, now getting the first taste of it. And I was so proud. And that's when it all hit me all of a sudden. I was so proud of my nation. Because I knew a guy like me, I'd never had a day in my life that I wasn't free. I'd never known a day in my life that was their daily reality. I knew that my liberty, I was born just like the Senate I want to call you Senator, but I'm going to, and I don't want to say Ken, just like Joe.
That's good.
Born in 1967. Born in those Vietnam veterans watching. I know we got some of you in the room here. Born while you were out fighting for my freedom. Those men before you, those Korean War veterans, fought the spread of communism on the Korean Peninsula. All the way back, World War II veterans, stopped the spread of those totalitarian regimes. Our liberty, all the way back to the Revolutionary War, our liberty had been bought and paid for by all those who'd gone before me. And I just realized what a special thing it was to be an American. I would probably say that was the beginning of my political awakening.